Well, good evening, everyone. Glad you could come back out. Uh, the system was acting up. Let me get you guys in the chat. Well, good evening, everyone. Glad you could come back out. Uh, the system was acting up. Let me get you guys in the chat. Well, good evening, everyone. Glad you could come back out. System. So, see you guys in the room here. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I see I can get you in the room now. We may have a number of people that came on and will miss it, but I will tape it and edit it and get it to them. So, good evening, Mom. Good evening, Al. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to teach as if everybody is here tonight. Can you guys do I look blurry on your screen? If you could type that in there. On the screen, do I look blurry? Blurred? Some reason it seems a little blurred. Okay, good. Thanks, Al. All right, let me get my screen set up here. Welcome to the YouTubers for joining us tonight. Good. I see a couple people are out there. And we're just going to go as usual. Okay, I don't know what's the uh, planetary alignment is, but something going on. We have had a lot of challenges with our electronics. So let us go ahead and get started. Let me grab some water right quick. All right, welcome to this evening session. Let's take 5 seconds and then I will start so I know where to pick up as I edit this out. All right, good evening, family, friends. I want to welcome you back to the living room where truth becomes the lived experience. I'm Greg Stanton, also known as Asar. I'm your facilitator for this evening's journey into ancient wisdom, metaphysical clarity, and personal demonstration. I'm glad you can join me. For the newcomers, the living room is a practitioner's laboratory. It's a space where we reclaim our now Valley philosophy and we integrate it with modern physical science. Whether you're here the first time or you were with us last week, or you're just joining again for the first time, tonight's teaching is structured so that all the participants can enter with clarity and move confidently through the cosmological, which means the creation stories, foundations that we established. a space where you can reclaim the Nile Valley philosophy and integrate it with the modern metaphysics, spiritual science. So here we do not simply come to learn the truth, but we come to activate the truth. So last week, in lecture one, we explored Hermopolis, the primordial principle of the Ogdad or the eight, the four pairs. And then we also looked at the Heliopolis cosmology. That is the first act of creation where they had the Ennead or the nine, not the nine principles. So you can pick that up. Tonight we want to shift from from the stage to the mind behind the stage. We want to enter what's known as the Memphite theology, the intellectual heart of ancient Kemet. And we're going to meet Ptah, Ptah. Also, some call him Ptah, the architect of creation through thought and speech. It's the root of the system behind our biblical creation story, behind the Greek logos philosophy, New Thought metaphysics. For some of you who know about Neville Goddard and his manifestation method, it comes right from this. Maybe he did not know it, but truth has a way of coming forward. And when we talk about now thought and the spiritual science, so the African mind that spoke the universe into being, before let there be light, before logos, before the Greek metaphysics or biblical theology, there was Ptah. Memphis preserved the world's earliest complete philosophy of creation. It is a universe that was spoken into existence by consciousness, a principle later that's echoed in our biblical story in Genesis 1 and 3, where it states, "And God said, Let there be light." In Genesis 1 and 1 and 2, where creation unfolds through intention and spoken command. This is not myth. This is African metaphysics, spiritual science. This is spiritual technology. This is the foundation of every tradition that teaches the creative power of mind and word. They don't know it because they have not been introduced to Kemetic science. But we find that Ptah reveals an eternal truth, and that truth being consciousness is the substance of reality, and speech is the mechanism behind manifestation. So when we look at consciousness, it's the universal field of intelligent awareness that perceives, imagines, it evaluates, and it brings form into being. Understanding this shift will help you as a practitioner from being passive believing to an active spiritual author, or you take authorship. You begin to walk in your divine design. So the lecture I gave last week gave us a stage, and tonight we meet the mind that speaks the stage into form. And you may say, why does Memphis matter? Well, it matters because it'll help you understand that what you already understand. It'll bring you to what I would like to call a overstanding. So tonight we will cover a couple key terms. Remember, we talked about neter or neteru. The word neter is where we get our word nature. And basically, the neters or those images that often was misaligned as gods, they weren't God, they were principles. So the word neter represents a divine principle or functional law of reality, not a Western God. Okay, so we have to be clear on that. And the word neteru represents more than one principles. So if I say netter, I'm talking about a principle. If I say neteru, I'm talking about more than one principle. Then another word we kind of dealt with last week was ma'at, and that is the principle of truth, harmony, alignment, and moral spiritual order. And you really can't operate in the word of power unless you're operating in ma'at, if you're operating with truth and harmony in right alignment. And then the other word we introduced, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tonight, is Kepra or Keperu, Keperu. Keperu, like I wear, the Keperu is actually a beetle, the dung beetle. And when you look at the dung beetle in its activity, takes it lays its eggs and then it rolls it into a sphere, a ball. And after some time, it's these eggs hatch and they come out. And so it represents creation. So Keperu also represents manifestation. Now, the Hermopolis um, cosmology or story described primordial potential. Okay, it talked about the science of divine possibility, the undifferentiated conditions that existed before creation. And we find that what has happened is we've taken all three stories and they separated them instead of looking at it as one story to understand all the principles. Then we talked about Heliopolis, it described the cosmic structuring, the science of emergence, the first organizational act as Ra or Atum rises and differentiates form from formless by speaking it. And tonight we're going to look at the Memphite theology, which reveals the mechanism. So it predates all of those. And if you were to pull them all together, it will be the Memphite, the Hermopolis, and then the Heliopolis. Okay. But when we talk about the Memphites, um, again, it reveals the mechanism. It's the science of how mind becomes matter. Okay, we say mind over matter, but there's a science behind it. It's the mental vibrational process by which intention transforms into form. That is, the raw, undifferentiated state is moved upon and it becomes pre-creation and ultimate creation. When we look at the Heliopolis, it described the cosmic structuring, the first organizational act of Ra or Atum, where it emerges. Now, the Memphite, um, it reveals the mechanism, how creation, the mental vibrational process by which intention becomes form. And this is important, especially when we talk about the words of power and the ability to speak into our lives, the things we want to experience. It's important that we understand the whole process, the science behind that. And that's what the Memphite cosmology or creation story is about. And that's really what our creation or the Genesis creation story, but it's looked at from another perspective and not as a science, the science of creation. So how of creation, the mental vibration process by which intention becomes form, this progression mirrors the development that we have in Genesis chapter 1, where the primordial deep, verse 2, divine ordering and the spoken activation unfolds in a sequence. And we're going to look at that sequence tonight. So the Memphite theology, cosmology, answers the question, how does creation actually occur? The Memphite theology teaches that creation is three things. It's intellectual, and it used the word psi, S-I-A, and it means conceived in the heart. We have scripture, Proverbs 23 and 7 says, as a man believes in his heart, so it is. So is he. Um, then we have the vibrational. So you have the sequence of the intellectual, which is the heart. The vibrational form is the spoken. It's spoken into the structure. That comes the tongue. And then you have the energetic or the heka, the activated through force. That is, when you combine those two, you have a word of power. When you combine that which comes from the heart and the tongue, and it creates a word of power. Now, if it's combined with the head, it says many are the plans of man, okay, or you understand that you follow the path of the senses, and the scripture tells us to be carnally minded is death. So we want to move away from um, connecting our head to our tongue and connect our heart to our tongue. So that's important. So this triad is visible, the triad of the intellect, the vibrational, and the energetic, and the Kemetic words would be the psi, the hu, and the heka. Again, the heka is the result of uh, comes as a word of power as a result of the intellect, the heart, and the tongue combining and speaking. So in this triad, you find it visible in Genesis chapter 1. Here in Genesis chapter 1, you find this triad. You find it visible in the Greek logos philosophy. In the word churches, they talk about the logos and the rhema word, not realizing that the principle they're trying to explain using the Greek definitions is really trying to get them back to what we're talking about tonight, because that's where the Greeks got it from. New Thought Declaration practice, you will see this principles, but they aren't connected back that far. Neville Goddard is a living from the end. This is ties right in, so we're going to look at that. And then the Now Thought, where I believe in demonstration of science. So we understand the framework. Now let's uh, meet the text that preserve this ancient system. And the text that I'm talking about is the Shabaka stone. And the Shabaka stone reads, um, written anew from a worm-eaten papyrus of old. So the Shabaka stone was put back together, and I went into this last week, and it talked about, it gave us the Memphite theology in stone. Modern scholarship affirms it was likely composed somewhere around um, 26,000, 2,600 to 2,100 years ago. Now, here's what we find is the Shabaka stone was put together, but the principles was older than that because he found it on Shabaka, written on a worm-eating papyrus during this uh, period. It's possibly early dynastic period, conceptually older than the pyramid text, and we talked about that last week. So the Memphite theology may be the oldest creation philosophy ever recorded, ever written down. Memphis is not a derivative, but it's foundational. It's not coming forth from any other teachings, it's foundation. Now that the antiquity is clear, because we didn't really want to go deep into that, let us meet the mind behind all of this that thinks creation into being. It's going to help you understand yourself a little better. If you say that I and the Father are one, pater, when we talk about the word father, it comes from the word pater, pattern, pater, pata. So that's part of the Greek word pater comes from pata. The definition, because pata is the father or the creator of all things. Pata is the principle of the divine mind. God is we say God is intellect or the creative mind. It's intentional and consciousness, the originating intelligence that conceives existence inwardly and commands it outwardly. So it's an inside out game. Source, which is represented as the principle of Ptah. Now, Ptah was not a actual person, even though we speak as though it's a principle. So when we talk about the principle starting from the inside out, the unmoved mover, everything it moves on things and things doesn't move it. Like we should not be moved by situations, but we should be one who moves situations. So when we look at the definition again of patah, it's the principle of divine mind, intentional consciousness, the originating intelligence that conceives existence inwardly and commands it outwardly. So, Ptah is not a craftsman deity. Ptah is the mind as cause. Okay, the mind as creator. There's a book I have that talks about mind as creator, and so Ptah is looked at as the mind as creator. It creates through the heart, the psi, the heart-based conception, what moves it, and the hue, the vibrational command, which is the tongue. And when you combine those two, again, we get the what's known as the Memphite formula or word of power. So every nectar and everything came into being through what the heart conceived and the tongue commanded. Okay, so if you're conceiving evil things and speaking evil things, that's what you're going to have in your life. So Source conceived an idea in his heart, his imagination, and it spoke it. This is the world's earliest doctrine of creation by the word. To understand the works of Ptah, we must understand its tools, the tools of creation. Now, the first tool is the Psi, SIA, or Sia, and the hue, okay? The two faculties of creation. So there's two faculties of creation, the heart and the tongue. The heart is the consciousness. Now, practitioners, you have to know this. The, the heart invites you to form a complete, coherent, end result image in consciousness. So the heart and the imagination is important that you give the thing as you imagine. That's Job, and the thing he imagined in his heart. That's the thing he spoke, and look what happened. So we got to understand the image comes into consciousness before speaking a single word. Clarity of conception governs the clarity of manifestation. So getting clear on what it is you desire to create. Um, we create recklessly when we just fly off of emotions, but you have to, you meditate on it. You get and you imagine, and then you speak. You image. Imagining is imaging. The side represents inner knowing. It represents imagination, conceptualization, perception, and intuitive intelligence from the heart, living from the heart. Now, the heart is known as the ib. So we're talking about the faculty of the heart, which is known as the consciousness, but the heart is physical heart itself is known as the ib in Kemet. And it was the seat of reasoning, memory, judgment, imagination, and spiritual perception. See, a lot of times we think that our brain is the seat of all knowledge, but it's really the intuitive part is within our ib, our heart. The brain operates solely, primarily as a instrument that collects data, stores data, and computes that data at such a fast rate, and it gives us decisions. And many times, the brain is about survival. Okay, it's going to remember what you could do and what you can't do. It'll remember that you don't step off a cliff. It'll remember if you hear a certain things, run for safety. It'll remember if it smells smoke, that means fire. So the brain has this function, and the word tells us to be carnally minded. That is to live according to the five senses is death. But we got to live. According to the heart, he said, I'll give you a new heart. We will move from the head to the ib. And here we have reasoning, memory, judgment, imagination, spiritual perception. Thus, creation begins in the consciousness of the heart and not the brain. Sia, S-I-A, is the inner picture and the inner imagination, the end held in the mind. So the picture you have, And that's a important piece when it comes to creation. You create from the end to the beginning. Now, the beginning is when you speak the word, but the creation starts when you imagine the word. John 1 and 1, it says, in the beginning was the imagination, and there was nothing that was not created except it was for the imagination. I know it says, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. Again, that's the Greeks, that's their not thoroughly understanding that God is not a person, it's a principle. It's that in the beginning was this principle and the principle of consciousness. And inside of the consciousness, you have the intuitiveness and the imagination, and the thing that it imagined, it began to speak it. So that talks about the hue. The hue is the tongue as a vibrational architect. Okay. So the hue or the tongue requires speech that matches the desire in. No contradiction, no divided intention. Your word must be clean and aligned with the picture that the C or the side holds. Okay. What you hold in your heart, your words got to be tight. Okay. The hue is not casual speech, it's divine speech. We talked about that Sunday. The hue is not casual speech, it's divine speech, and it's causal speech. It causes things to happen. Okay. Uh, so when we talk about casual, all speech is causal, causal, but we want to have divine speech. The hue is intentional utterance, vibratory command, sound shaped by consciousness. Okay. So the hue is intentional, deliberate utterance. That's why we say that of my heart, the words of my mouth, and the meditations of my heart, the things I'm meditating on, the things I'm intentional, okay, let them be acceptable. Let it be that thing that drops into the atmosphere and is acceptable and is birthed after its kind. Biblically, when we talk about the hue of the tongue, it's and God said that's the biblical identification with the hue. In New Thought, we use affirmations. So we are affirming or we're stating what it is we are creating. And then in the word of faith, we call it declarations. When I pastor the word of faith, we would always decree, and that was we would decree a thing in alignment with the scriptures. Now, in the Kemetic science, it's the Hekau, Hekau. Now, what is the Hekau? It's the original system of spoken words of power, later particularly echoed in the Greek concept of the rhema. Okay, so the rhema is the activated and timely word. That's a rhema word, or I got it. So it's the same as the word of power. So we see you got the logos, okay, and that's an attempt of structuring something, and then the rhema is bringing it forward from concept or idea to concept to actually manifestation. Now, a little historical note here: the Greek philosophers, most notably, are Heraclitus and the later Stoics. They encountered the ancient African wisdom system or the spiritual science when they came in contact with Kemet. Their concept of logos was an attempt to translate the Kemetic understanding of hue, that is the vibrational, intelligent word that structures reality. They were trying to wrap their minds around it. Now, Rhema, which appears later in biblical thought, reflects another layer of this transition, capturing the idea of an activated, timely, intentional word of power. These Greek and biblical terms were not origin points, meaning they didn't start with the Greek or in the Bible, but they are interpretations of a far older comedic spiritual technology. So the Greek started with the logos. It's the Greek philosophical attempt to articulate an older comedic principle of hue, that is, the structuring, organizing word that shapes reality. That's the hue, that's the tongue. They also had the biblical example is when we see and God said. Again, the new thought is affirmations, and the word of faith is declarations. So the structure is see, sia, or heart, tongue, structure, or manifestation. Thought becomes the image becomes the word becomes the structure. It starts inside, the thought becomes something imagined, the thing that's imagined becomes a spoken word, or first is a thought, and then is spoken, and then into the earth realm, and it manifests. So thought becomes image, image becomes the word, and the word becomes the structure. Or this is what I would like to call metaphysical law. But thought and word cannot manifest without power. Okay? So got to have power, the hekau, the power behind the word. Heka, the divine power of activation. The Heka is the energetic force that animates thought and speech. Without Heka, even truth remains inert. Truth to power. We say, speak truth to power. That's where we get this from. Activated words of power. Words activated are powerful. The Heka are intentional, vibratory utterances that are aligned with Ma'at. I mean, that are right, that are true, that are just. Okay? All spiritual systems use tone, rhythm, repetition, cadence. Why? Because it's sound technology. Sound, even though we focus on words, but words are sounds. And when you speak a certain word, you get a certain sound. You get a certain frequency. So it's that's and um, the frequency dictate what's attracted. Okay. You can pick up a person's frequency by the words they say, because the words they say are emanating from a place, their hearts. And so it's important that we understand sound technology. Now we add the final ingredient, which is force and motion. So we see Ptah and Sekhmet. Okay, Sekhmet represents its divine partner, the divine principle that partners with the Ptah, the fire of execution. Sekhmet represents kinetic force. It represents decisive action. It represents transformative heat, represents protection, necessary destruction. Usually, Sekhmet is presented as a female lion. So when we talk about Sekhmet, it's talk about execution. Where Ptah is the architect, Sekhmet is the builder, the executor, the enforcer of intention. Like um, a man sows a seed, and the seed is sown into the woman, which represents Sekhmet. And she is the builder, the executor, the enforcer of intention. She houses that seed, nurtures that seed, births that seed. But together they form the complete creation engine. We always talk about divine masculine, divine feminine, which is not a male or female thing, but it's the essence of the energy. So when we look at that, we understand that the complete creation engine represents the divine masculine and feminine. There's a thought, there's a word, there's power, there's action, and then there's manifestation. This is African spiritual science, the science of manifestation. Thought, word, power, action, manifestation. Now, Ptah creation sequence. There's a five-stage formula when we look at the principle of patah. The neteru, meaning more than one, refers to the functional divine of divine principles working together, laws or forces that emerge in direct response to an intention, similar to the universe's laws organizing around a chosen outcome. So you have the C, the heart, that deals with conception, okay? The hue that aligns with the declaration that comes from the things that perceived or imagined. The heka, because the thought becomes a spoken word. And then you have the neteru, the emergence of principles. So even when we look at pata, pata and segment, when we look at the two in the beginning, they moved on the the undifferentiated and differentiated, begin to call it into order, begin to call it into being. So they had the conception, the declaration, the activation, the emergence of the principles, and now manifestation comes forth from it. So let me go a little deeper with you here. So the psi, principle one, represents the conception of the heart. If the inner picture is vague, creation collapses. Example, I want a better job. Unclear, no movement. That's why I tell people, what job do you want? What does a better job look like? Then you have the declaration or the hue. Speech must match intention. I want a job plus nobody's hiring scrambles the field, okay? Because you just ruled it out. So you got to watch your declarations. When you say mind cancer, but you've been um, fasting or holding the space for to be cancer free, but you keep saying mine, you bring ownership into that conversation. Then you have the activation. Emotions fuel manifestation. If it don't move you, what makes you think it's going to move the creator or move the principle? Affirming abundance while feeling fear neutralizes results. So you got to make sure that what you are affirming is what you desire. Okay, not just being a weather forecaster, speaking back at yourself or to others what you see in the natural realm. Okay, then you have the emergence of the principles. That's the Netaru. The universe rearranges around intention. Good example of that. A chance lead or insight, resources, synchronicity appears. When you say that was just by chance, what's the likelihood? That's the emergence of the principles. The principles are working together. Now, manifestation is that's when things are aligning for you when you talk about the emergence of the principles. But the manifestation is called the Kepra or the Kaparu or Capra is the result which appears in physical form. Example, the job offers arrive. That's an example of manifestation of Kaparu. So why does all this matter, you might ask? When we look in Genesis 2 and 7, he talks about breath spirit as an activating force. And what this does is it reveals even deeper the Heka as the life power, because you can't speak without spewing force air, okay? Revealing the Heka as the life power that animates form. So the breath you breathe animates form. So if you got unclear thought, nothing happens. If you have contradictory speech, you have a scrambled intention. If you have a weak energy, you get stalled results. If things are in misalignment, you get blocked outcomes. If you have a wrong identity, manifestation has no landing. You get some things by trial and error, but it's not consistent. If a principle is a principle, it's consistent. Gravity is consistent. If you step off a plane, not just a plane, but a plane, like a plane, like a ledge, you're going to fall because that's the principle of gravity. You can't violate it. I mean, you can't break the principles. You can violate them, and then there's consequences. So the Bethe formula is mechanical, predictable, and governable. Now we turn to the biblical parallels that reveal the Memphite origin in Genesis. Let's look at some of those before we wrap up. In Genesis 1 and 1, we see the sigh, the heart, we see the tongue, and we see the kephra, things moving. The opening line of Genesis is a metaphysical summary, not a historical timestamp. In the beginning corresponds to the heart. The divine conception, the idea held in the heart, the mind or source, moved on it. Then it says God created. That's the hue. That's the tongue. That's the declarative word, the vibrational command that initiates structure. Then you have the heaven and earth, corresponds to Keperu, the invisible and the visible form emerging. It's buried its eggs in the dung ball and is rolling it, and the eggs are invisible. But one day, the egg is sitting still, or the sphere that the dung beetle has been pushing is sitting still, and you see these little eggs come sprouting out, moving out. And what that is just the manifestation. So this Memphite cosmology or formula in biblical language says Genesis 1 also reveals an ontological beginning, not a chronological one. Okay? In the beginning signals the moment of divine conception. It's the inner blueprint. Before anything external unfolds, we see Genesis 1 and 3, and God said, "Let there be light," demonstrating creation initiated by a spoken word. And when you're creating, you want to cut the light on first. You really want to understand. You want to be illumined. Okay. So that's important. Let's see if I want to go a little. Yeah, I'm gonna go a little further, and we're gonna wrap it up. Um, we find in Genesis 1 and 2, darkness was found upon the face of the deep. And that maps directly to the Hermopolitan cosmology, where it talks about the nun and the cook. The nun corresponds to the deep, the undifferentiated primordial waters, and the cook corresponds to darkness, the fertile, unformed potential. So they understood that, the Kemetic scientists. So Genesis began with the same pre-creative condition that's described in Kemet, proof of the Nile Valley's intellectual inheritance. You can look in Genesis 1 and 6, 1 and 9, and 1 and 11. Genesis 1 and 6, 1 and 9, 1 and 11. Each stage of creation unfolds through divine speech, words of power, mirroring the hue as vibrational command. Your words have to align. If your words don't move you, what makes you think it's going to move anyone or anything else? That's important. Now, let's integrate a modern metaphysical voice who unknowingly taught the Memphite method. Now, I won't say unknowingly because he was influenced. Who was the he? Neville was influenced by an Ethiopian Jew, Beta Israel, who taught him these principles. And he didn't necessarily connect them to Kemet, but he taught these principles. So Neville's signature teaching that many of you are aware of is if a practitioner desires improved health, Neville would instruct them to assume the feeling of vitality now. Okay? Mirroring Patta's method of conceiving the completed end before the initiating process. Okay, like in Genesis chapter 1, we see the spiritual creation of man. In Genesis chapter 2, we see the physical creation of man. So we have to operate with the same things, the same principles. Now, how Neville, now, Neville's signature teaching was assume the feeling that means the heart, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. He says, live from the end. Is this is a direct echo of what I like to call mid-fight creation story or system. So how Neville aligns with the path. So he first starts with conceive the end in imagination. That's Genesis 1 and 26. Let us make man in our image, demonstrating the conception of the end before the formation. That's the sia, the sigh. Then you have the hue. Speak as if it's already accomplished. This is Neville's teaching. The heka, feel the reality of the fulfilled desire. That's you feel it, then you close your eyes and you see it, and you ultimately be it. Then you have the netaru, or the principles. The word recognizes around the internal assumption. As a man thinketh, so is he. In his heart. It works that way. And then the last piece is the state externalizes a physical experience, and the state being the Keperu. It externalizes as physical experience. So Neville was teaching Patah's system without naming it. You can look in Hebrews 11 and 1. The faith you find in Hebrews 11 and 1, faith is the substance, okay, of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So the faith is the evidence of the thing you don't see right now. You have to hold on to that. Out of sight doesn't mean out of mind. Out of sight means it's working to get to you. So faith is the substitute, is the evidence of things not seen, which reflects the psi or the sia as unseen conception preceding manifestation. Now, when we look at both of these systems, the end comes first in Patah's system and in the system by Neville Goddard. The end determines the beginning. The internal state is the cause, not the effect. This is the spiritual science behind all effective manifestation. Genesis 1 repeatedly demonstrates each creative act begins with, and God said, revealing intention, declaration, and manifestation. So that's how you have to begin. With cosmic and biblical parallels clear, we can now move to bring the system home. And so, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to end here, and we'll pick up next week on bringing the system home, how you as a practitioner applies this information. Because so I'm not out here to teach a history lesson. I'm not out here to teach just it's just a history lesson. I'm here to teach you, unfold the mystery lesson, to be able to understand what these principles were about and how did they apply them such that they had mastery. They had mastery over control of thought, control of speech, and control of action. Control of meditation, control of speech, and then control of action. That's what it's really all about. So you're not separate from Patah's creative pattern. You also embody it. Every demonstration in your life, in my life, follows the same 5 steps. You think it, you speak it, you energize it, you align and take action, you manifest it. Awesome. All right, that's all I have tonight. I'm going to wrap it up with we ended up coming on a little late, so it's 9:30 on the East Coast, and so it threw everybody off. But I apologize. I'll clean this up and I'll get this to you, and we'll pick up next week on the application of the word of power. So you guys have a wonderful evening. I'm going to come off of the Zoom platform, I mean the YouTube platform, and then I'll entertain some questions from those of you who are here inside of the Zoom room. All right, if you got a question, you can raise your hand. If you got an insight, you can raise your hand. All right, and to that individual who's watching live right now, you got a question, you can go ahead and type it in there, yeah, type it in there. If you want to type in your name, so that way I can know who we're talking to this evening. Let me put it. There you go. Awesome. I don't see any hands up. It is late, but I believe that what needed to go forth came forth. And I look forward to talking to you all in the 6 o'clock hour on tomorrow for our morning meditation. You have a wonderful evening. Peace. Okay.